Hey everyone, this is Steve Good, and welcome back to our next episode of the Coin Chat on mining, episode 2, where we're going to dig in deep with Yuri and talk all about the other bits and pieces that we haven't talked about yet. Yuri, I'm so excited because I know there's something that's burning that you really want to ask me about spending crypto.
There is, Steve, and thank you for that lovely setup. But as we left it, I told my exciting story about my attempt at the Delta Sky Lounge. So I want to hear your attempt at buying something rather substantial with Bitcoin.
Do I tell you now, or do I make you wait till the end of the episode?
I mean, you could make me wait, but I hate waiting. So let's.
Okay, fair enough. So my wife and I had to take the car in for just some basic servicing, what have you, and Seat dealership. And we just, while we were there, we went into the general office, and I've been thinking about upgrading the car. It's a 7-seater, which is great for the kids and dogs. And I thought maybe it's worth, just trying to get an upgrade, but not right this minute, but just to ask. So I just said to the general manager, because we got to chatting, and nice guy. And I said, so, how much would it be to, buy a new car? And he said, well, you could trade your car in for about $10K, and the residual amount you'd have to spend would be about $30,000. So, I'm converting to dollars for you. So, it'd be about $40,000. And I said, okay. I said, so, that sounds pretty good. How about if I, pay you I'll give you the car, and I'll pay you in two. So at the time, Bitcoin was 15K each. I said, so how about if I pay you with the car in 2 Bitcoin? And this guy was an Italian guy, which makes the story a little even more amusing. So he was just stunned silent, and he just said, I'm sorry, sir, what's a Bitcoin? And I said, well, it's the digital currency that's sort of, rocking the world. It's the, the latest and greatest. Mm-hmm. And one Bitcoin's worth 15,000 right now. And he said, wait, let me just see what Bitcoin is. He said, I've never heard of it before. Is there anybody accepting it? And my wife chimes in, and she said, well, you've heard of Lambos, right? And he said, well, I'm Italian. Of course I've heard of Lambos. Well, they sold out. And he said, what do you mean they sold out? She said, well, you can't buy one because everyone bought them with Bitcoin. He's like, I have to find out what this is. And he's like Googling Bitcoin while I'm sitting there with him in the shop. And he left a screen open with Bitcoin price. He said, well, I'd really have to go and talk to the general office. I really don't even know what this is until now. And looking at it, I said, well, right here while we're sitting here right now, I could do this. I can give you 2 Bitcoin and the car, and I'll leave right now, and you'll have 40,000 in cash. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, let me just, make some phone call. I said, I don't think there's anything I can do about this, but, I've got some other things to work on, and your car will be out in a couple of minutes. And we kind of left it at that. Yeah. And then we were probably there waiting for about an hour, and there was a bit of a blip in the market while we were sitting there. And I went back over to him, seeing the blip happen. It was now 17,000 Bitcoins for $1. And I said, well, you do recognize that you probably just lost $4,000. I wonder what your management would say. And he said, what do you mean? I said, go look at the price of Bitcoin now. Oh, it's 17,000 now. I said, yeah. He said, oh, I see. I said, yeah. I said, I'll still honor the 2 Bitcoin, but you're going to end up with an extra 4,000. No, I really can't do anything. I can't take it. And I really don't even know where to begin or what to do and whatever. And I said to him, why don't you just jump in and listen to our podcasts? So he made me write down my podcast for him. And he said, check awesome. Back with me in like 6 weeks. I'll see what the general management says. So I'm going to go back and see him in a few weeks and see if anything changes. But of course, probably won't. But anyway, it was entertaining nonetheless, just trying to sell the car. And he was asking everyone in the shop, hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? Have you heard of Bitcoin? And everyone's saying, what's wrong with the guy? He lost his mind. I mean, then no one knew what he was talking about. And he was getting a bit excited because when he realized it had gone to 17,000, he said, maybe you should be doing something. But we appealed to his Lamborghini senses in Italian, but it didn't go anywhere. But at least it was worth a try. And we probably made about 10 people aware of Bitcoin now.
That's great. And at least one additional listener of our podcast in Italy.
Well, Italian guy, yeah. I don't know where he lives. He lives in the UK, I think. But anyway, yeah. So, needless to say, maybe he'll tell his Italian friends as well and check on his Lamborghini compatriots and find out what's going on.
Maybe. Oh, that's awesome. Nice work, sir. Very nice work.
I did try.
Yes. Okay, so let's jump in today's continuation where we're going to start with building your own home mining rig. And what's that about?
Right. So maybe let's just do a quick recap. So last week, what we talked about was, first of all, for the really, really simple, easy way to get started, there's Genesis mining. Mm-hmm. And then probably equally easy and a bit more fun because it's actually within your own control is MinerGate, although unless you have a couple of GPUs running on a PC, then you probably won't make very much, but it certainly is fun to watch the thing ticking along, kind of dreaming about some money coming in your hands. And then we talked briefly about using NiceHash, where you can buy other people's mining power and then use that mining power to assign to a mining pool. What I didn't mention is that one of the places where I send my mining power is to a place called Mining Pool Hub. There are a number of other mining pool hubs out there like Dwarf Pool and Nano Pool. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit on this episode, but just wanted to kind of summarize that piece because it's important to understand that there are collectives, groups of people who all pool their mining power together in order to actually create enough mining power to make it easy enough to actually make money mining at home. Cool. Okay, so mining at home really requires setting up a PC, and there are some things you need to have to make that PC work. First and foremost is you don't need a computer computer case. In fact, that's probably the worst way to do mining at home is to have your computer sitting in a computer case because the computer cases hold on to too much heat. And mining is all about keeping your GPUs as cool as possible. So if you can put your mining equipment in a cool room, in a basement, not where it's damp, of course, but someplace where it's cool, then that's going to be the best place. Don't leave it sitting in the sun or by windows, certainly not in the summertime. In the winter, maybe it doesn't matter as much. But cool places, dark places are best. That's first and foremost. And, lower floors are better, of course, than upper floors if possible because, of course, heat rises. So that's the first thing. So to get a mining rig started at home, the first thing you probably want to do is go online into Amazon and find something like some sort of a metal storage rack that's, let's call it 3 levels. Mm-hmm. I'll actually tell you how I set my whole mining rig up myself. So it was really kind of an interesting experiment on can I actually do it. So first I went off and bought this metal rack, 3 levels, and then I realized, well, now I'm going to buy the bits and pieces I need to buy. So let's just give everybody the laundry list. What do you need to buy to set up a mining rig? Well, first of all, you need to buy a voltage meter. And the voltage meter is so you can actually measure how much computer output your computer is generating so that you can make sure that you're then able to fine tune how your computer operates and runs in terms of the total voltage and power that you're using, because that's pretty critical because that's the major difference between making and losing money is how much power you're actually using. Okay. Second thing is you need a motherboard. Now, motherboards, you don't need a really high-end expensive one. You just need a really basic motherboard that will really just allow you to store memory and store your CPU and have a number of slots to plug in your power and your GPU cards. And we'll talk about how you plug the cards in since we don't actually plug them into the motherboard either. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Right. So here's how it works. You buy, for example, a low. I'll give you an example of what I did. I'll do it in euros, but let's call it 1-to-1 the dollar just for the moment to keep it simple. So I bought my voltage meter, and that cost me, let's call it about $20. And then I bought my Celeron CPU, which cost me about $50. And then I bought some memory. I only bought 8 gigabytes of memory, and that's how little memory you actually need because mining isn't about having lots of memory on a computer. It's just not necessary. So that cost me about, call it $80. Now, the next thing I bought, which is really important, is power, your power unit. I bought a power unit that has 1,000 watts on it. So typically you can expect to, so a couple of things. One is with your power unit, you should never run it at more than about 80 to 85%. So in other words, with 1,000 watts, I should never run my total PC at more than about 8 to 850, because you don't want to really push your power unit to its absolute limits. There's just no benefit in doing that. It's going to burn the thing out, and you're using a lot of power. Typically, each GPU will take anywhere between, let's say, between 120 and 140 watts. So if you start doing the math on that, 5 cards will be about 600. So you can probably run about 7 cards, which is actually what a motherboard holds. Mm-hmm. Typical motherboards hold about 7 cards. So 1,000 watts should be about right, plus or minus, but it's good enough to get started. And then the real trick to setting it up is you need what are called GPU risers. GPU risers are nothing more than cables that are little cables that plug into each of the PCI slots on your motherboard, and the other half of them plug into the actual GPU cards themselves. So then you're probably wondering, now where does my GPU go? Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
But equally, you have to talk about where does the motherboard go, because we need to put the motherboard someplace. So the two pieces of the puzzle then. So I wanted to put my motherboard onto the rack, but of course you cannot put an electronic piece of equipment onto a metal rack, because that probably won't go for very long. So my next mission was I had to go out and find a way to cut a piece of PVC to a size that was roughly the size of the motherboard, and then find about 6 or 7, I forget, or 8 motherboard screws, which are little riser screws. They just raised up a little tiny bit, which are the same ones that you find inside of all the PC cases anyway. And you just need to make sure you have those so that you can attach them into the PVC and then attach the motherboard into the little screws that are attached to the PVC. So my first job was to go to one of these hardware stores and try to convince them to cut a piece of PVC for me. And funny enough, nobody wanted to cut it because they only cut wood. So I ended up buying this massive sheet of PVC because they didn't sell anything smaller. And it was about 4 or 5 centimeters thick. And the reason it's so thick is because I need to go home now and cut the piece to size, and then I need to put the holes into the PVC and make sure that they're deep enough that I can screw them in. So basically what I discovered was that actually cutting PVC is not as hard as everyone thinks. You just have to measure it, and then you have to do a little bit of with a knife or something sharp, just kind of getting a groove into the PVC that's just enough of a groove so it creates kind of a fulcrum point, and then you just line it up along the edge of a table and just do snap. And it's a little scary because it's a big, strong piece of plastic, but it does snap in does snap pretty accurately. And I ended up with this piece of PVC. And then the next step was I had to take my motherboard and I had to line it up on top of this PVC, and I had to mark the holes with a pen. And of course, PVC being plastic, if you just move just a tiny bit and you use the wrong kind of a pen, well, if you're using like a ballpoint pen, you can't mark the plastic. And if you're using any kind of a felt tip pen and you move, then of course the mark moves all over the place. So you have to be very careful how you do it and really just line it up correctly. But once I got the holes marked, then I just took a screw, a drill, and with a drill bit, and I just made sure that I had the right size drill bit, drilled little tiny holes, and I literally just took the riser screws and screwed them into the PVC plastic, and then I took the motherboard, laid it on top, and had other motherboard screws that go in with the little washers, the rubber washers, and I screwed them all in. Voila, motherboard is on the case. And I was like, oh my God, I'm ready to mine. This is amazing. This was like, the hardest part. This was the scary part, was just getting that done. Now I had my hard disk already pre-formatted running Windows 10, which I just had to plug in with the standard SATA cable into the board. I plugged in the memory into the board. I plugged in the CPU into the board, the power socket into the board. Oh, and one other thing I also had to buy, which is a real key thing, is that not all motherboards have an on-off button. So guess what happened after I built the whole thing?
Either it never ever turned on or it never ever turned off.
I couldn't turn it on.
Oh.
So you can buy online these little cables that are equivalent effectively to what you have in your computer cases, which are all the little pieces that are for the LED lights and the power switch and all that. So you just have to get a little power switch, computer power switch cable, and you have to plug that into the power switch slot. So it's a little tiny 2-pin slot on the motherboard. Plug that in, and bang, power switch, everything was up and running.
Nice.
So now it's working, it's running. So that was the first part. That was the hardware side. Plugged it in with an HDMI cable into one of the GPUs. Oh, and by the way, so GPUs, I didn't talk about that. So I actually literally hung each GPU from the top level of the rack. The CPU motherboard is at the bottom of the rack, and the middle shelf is where I put my power and my hard disk. And the hard disk is sitting in some sort of little casing, so it's not exposed to the metal rack. And so the risers plugged into the motherboard go all the way up top to the GPUs, and I literally tie each GPU to the rack with zip line cable, the little plastic, zip ties.
Mm-hmm.
And to make sure they're spaced appropriately, I had to get a bit creative here. So I started looking around for bottles of wine, had to drink a few extras, and took out the corks, because corks basically don't catch on fire, and they're fantastic because they don't get heat, they don't take on heat, and I just literally just kind of put them in between some of the GPUs. Now I know some people are going to be out there saying you're crazy, but I didn't put them any place where there was heat anyway. I just did it to make sure that the cards were evenly spaced apart. Okay. Since this is a real makeshift rig and I was just trying to get it to work. So I've only got like 2 or 3 screws that are corks that are actually being used. But, literally I put each of the GPUs one by one, spaced apart. First of all, just make sure they're hanging nicely on the rack. And then I just put some corks in between to make sure there was just enough space that there was consistency across all the GPUs. And that was it. And it's up and it's that's it hardware wise. It's up and running. Turn PC on, and voila, I have my PC working. Windows 10 is up and running. And now I've got a PC ready to go, but I'm not mining yet because I haven't done the software side.
Okay.
Right. Now, the software side comes down to going back to what we talked about earlier. What do you want to mine?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets a little bit techie, but I won't go into the techie stuff. I'll just kind of describe it and help people to understand it. So I'll just go through what I did because it makes it easier just to talk about your own platform and what you do. But the principles are identical regardless. So first of all, if you look at a project like Mining Pool Hub, they've got a whole range of coins on there, and they also tell you all the algorithms. And so, by the way, going back to our NiceHash discussion earlier, they list out the algorithms, and then they tell you the coins that they mine against. And then they tell you the port number, because the port number is what you need for the mining software. So that's all quite nice, because they tell you if you want to mine Z Classic, it's Equihash, and if you want to mine Feathercoin, it's NeoScript algorithm, and if you want to mine Ethereum, it's Fhash, and Monero, it's Kryptonite. Not Kryptonite, but crypto and tonight, TONIGHT. Anyway, okay. So there's a whole range of different, as I said, algorithms and coins. So that was the first thing, was just getting onto Mining Pool Hub, and that's where I actually found out about the algorithms I used with NiceHash. So let me just stop there for 1 second, Yuri. Do you have any questions so far?
No, I'm with you so far on this. Please keep going.
Okay, so the thing that you need to do now is kind of work out which software you want to use for running the mine. Okay, and so all you really need to do is download some software and set up a script. Script is actually really easy because everyone pretty much lets you just copy and paste it from the internet. So that's not so bad. It's just making sure you point it to the right place. Because if you point it to the wrong place, you're giving someone else your mining money, and that's not the best idea. And of course, like anything, they give you out-of-the-box scripts, and they might have an Ether address in there, and it's actually not for you. It's for someone else like them, but they're giving it to you as an example. So when I look at, for example, Mining Pool Hub, and I look at Ether, they give you a range of options. They tell you that you can use Claymore, you can use Ethminer, you can use QT Miner, which is coming from EtherChain. You've also got another product from Coinatron. There's another one called EthProxy from Dwarf Pool. And there's Ethminer from Ethereum package itself. And there's also another one out there that many people know about called Genoil. So that's a whole range of different mining packages that are the software that's effectively allowing you to connect from your PC to the mining pools themselves. And that's all it is. This little piece of software is effectively taking all of the requests for transactions to be confirmed. It's sending it to your GPUs, kicking your GPUs into full gear, and then as a result, it's sending back responses back to your mining pool, and your mining pool are collecting all the responses together and effectively looking for the way to confirm that particular transaction so that you can make the money. And it's a whole process that goes on for confirming and settling coins, as we've talked about at a very kind of high level. Okay. So what I had to do was basically, now I decided to do something a little different. So I decided to do what's called dual mining. So normally people assume you can only mine one coin with your GPUs at one time. But in fact, you can actually, with some programs, mine two coins at the same time. And what I found was I actually didn't get much difference between mining one or two in terms of the performance. So I just went ahead and mined two because I just thought it's more interesting to see what happens. So I'm literally mining Ether and Sia Coin. Sia Coin is a cloud-based storage company, and I'm literally dual mining. So the way it works is if you take Claymore, for example, they give you a whole kind of long string on the Mining Pool Hub website. So you download the Claymore mining software. There's a little BAT file that's sitting on there that you have to modify. And you take the information that's stored on Mining Pool Hub as an example, where they say to mine Ethereum and Sia Coin concurrently, and they give you a huge long string, and you just copy and paste that in.
Okay.
Okay. And it's got the port numbers. It's got all the commands and everything else that you need to put in there. And the most important thing is what's called a username and a worker name, because your username is, of course, the username that is assigned to yourself within the Mining Pool Hub itself that you're mining to. And if you have multiple workers, then you might need to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, especially if you have multiple hubs running at once and you want them all assigned to yourself. But generally speaking, most people just have one mining rig and they assign it all to one place. So for me, it might be Steve G22, and my worker name might be Happy. So it'd be SteveG22.happy, which is my username.worker name. And that's it. And pretty much you're off and running.
All right, cool. I mean, that's a fairly complicated process, but it all...
Yes, setting it up was actually the most painful part. Figuring out the software wasn't as hard. It was just getting the software to be downloaded, figuring out where to find the batch file, and then to start kind of digging in a bit into how to make sure that you optimize the mining so that it works. Now there are some little gotchas that I discovered. Now I remember I talked at the beginning about trying to identify how much mining power you're taking or how much electricity you're using at home. I mean, and here's what's really interesting is that normally with GPUs, and gamers will get this, you want to do what's called overclocking your GPU, which means that basically you want to run it at more than 100% power, and you want to push that card to its absolute limits before the card basically can't cope anymore and your screen starts fizzling and doing weird things. But when you overclock a GPU, it's taking up more electricity. Okay. But actually, when it comes to mining at home, the GPU doesn't need that power as much as it needs memory. And that's actually quite contradictory because people don't realize that. So whether I run my card at 100% or 120% or 70%, I'm not actually getting any more throughput, but I am reducing my electricity costs significantly by going from 120% down to 70, so significantly that I'm actually getting my card down to that 120, 130 watt per card level, which is actually the optimal amount. And if you're running your cards above that, then you're just burning electricity, which of course is just silly because you're not getting any more mining power out of doing that. Mm-hmm. So that's a real important thing. And the flip part of that is that where you have NVIDIA cards, you can effectively increase the amount of memory you're using, and you need to just kind of keep an eye on the heat of the card and make sure that the card is within a certain range. So you don't want the card running, at 80 Celsius. That's too high. Anywhere between 55 and 75 is kind of that optimal range. Obviously, lower is better because, a cooler card is a happier card. Mm-hmm. And you want to keep an eye on the fan and make sure that if the card is getting too hot, you just increase the fan speed. So the software I love using for this to monitor all of it is MSI Afterburner, which allows you to monitor all cards regardless of whether they're NVIDIA, whether they're MSI cards, whether they're EVGA cards. There's all sorts of different GPU cards out there, and it doesn't really matter. When you're using MSI Afterburner, you can monitor all the cards together and just swap between them to see how each card is doing and to tune each card. Tuning is a whole art, which I've spent a lot of time figuring out to optimize the electricity output, monitoring how the cards are performing, and being able to see individually how each card is actually generating and outputting. And of course, knowing which cards to buy as well is probably a whole other discussion around what to buy, because there's AMD cards and there's NVIDIA cards. The best thing generally for that is just to Google online and see, which cards give you the best bang for your buck in terms of how much money to spend. But if you want to start at the low end, you can start at, let's say, $300 for a GPU. And if you want to go for more high-end ones, you can go for ones around $450 to $500. But I wouldn't say to go for more than that, because ultimately the whole game is about making sure you can optimize how much money you're making, and it's all about ROI. So how much money you're going to make back, return on investment. And the more money you spend, the longer it takes to make money back. Of course, the higher end the card is, then the faster it runs. But there's kind of you reach a certain limit where getting more and more expensive cards is not giving you a vastly higher amount of hash rate. It becomes a diminishing, set of returns. So typically, if you're getting something between, for Ethereum, 23 and 30 for a GPU, you're in the right place. And that's the difference between a 1060 and a 1070 in the GPUs that are NVIDIA based cards. So, and in the AMD cards, and I don't know them as well because I've been using NVIDIA, so I'm biased toward them only because that's what I'm using. But AMDs, there's the 4 series and the 5 series of cards. I think it's the 470s and the 570s, which basically are in the same realms and do roughly the same things. And one of the thing about that is you can actually have a whole mixture of different GPUs. You do not need to use all the same. It's nice to have them all the same because then you kind of know how to tune each one and kind of set them all the same and set it once and just optimize them all once and do it all the same. But reality is it's oftentimes hard to buy all the same cards when you go online. There's a lot of times limits or cards unavailable. So, frankly, I've ended up with a whole mixture of different GPUs of 1060s and 1070s. But it's making me money every month, and I'm happy. So as long as Ethereum keeps rising in price, the mine pays itself off. And as long as the prices keep going up, then your mine will pay itself off faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So you did bring up an interesting point, which is the ROI. I do want to talk about that briefly. So after someone has this set up, yeah. How do you decide what coin to mine? And also, how do you determine what your ROI is, including your utility costs, the actual hardware cost, and all of that? Like, is there how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's not there's no kind of easy answer to that one because a lot of people have opinions on that. So I'm sure we'll get people throwing their opinions around. That's fine. Please throw your opinions and tell us what you think. I love it. So here, first of all, Crypto Compare has some mining calculators. So you literally go to Crypto Compare, you go to the tab called mining, and then at the bottom it's calculators. And they give you some indications of, what you're going to get if you're mining Bitcoin, Ether, Ethereum Classic, Monero, Zcash, Pascal, Dash, and Litecoin. Those are the ones they list on their website. Okay. And at least it gives you some indication. There are some other websites where you can actually look at like how much mining power will I get with these different types of cards. I don't have those websites to hand or off the top of my head, but there are a number of different ways to work out roughly what kind of mining power you're going to get. And actually, times the best way is just Google mining, 1070 GTX, and you'll get back tons and tons of stuff from Reddit and from Medium and from a whole raft of different blogs and websites. So you'll find that information fairly quickly in terms of, what kind of, first of all, what hash power you're going to get, and second of all, various comparisons of, what kind of mining you should expect to get for doing it. And then, of course, as I mentioned on Mining Pool Hub, when you first log into it, they do have a list of coins with the algorithm, the current coin, and then some sort of anticipated returns that you'll get for mining on that particular algorithm stroke coin. Okay. So at least it's an indicator. The thing is, it's changing all the time. So there are some techniques that you can also apply for auto switching. And auto switching is basically, I'm running on port 17023, which is Z Classic, and now I want to switch over to Monero, it's 17024, and the port is basically tied to the algorithm on Mining Port Hub. So there's some really kind of wacky things that they can do where you can be mining along and it'll auto switch for you. But of course, that goes back to what you're mining in the first place with the mining software you've downloaded. So in the case of me, I'm mining with Claymore, and the Claymore mining I'm using is specifically set up for Ether and Coin. So I just keep mining Ether and Coin, and I don't really think about anything else. I just let it run. But you can certainly, if you want to optimize it, you can look at I'm going to go for Z Classic because according to Mining Pool Hub, it seems to be the most profitable right now. And then I'll go look at the Z Classic coin in Mining Pool Hub and find out what software I need to use to run it. And then I run the software and then just let it run. But what's not efficient is constantly changing every day to mine different coins, because then you get little bits and pieces of different coins and you don't even have enough that you can actually do anything with it. So I think people that get kind of more mature about mining don't try to chase the profit. They just set themselves up with one or two or three different coins they want to mine depending on how they set their mining up, and just mine that particular coin and don't worry about it too much and just keep an eye on it every so often.
Okay. Oh, good. That makes sense. So
overwhelmed yet? I know it's a lot of factual stuff, but it's like you have to kind of go through the journey, and as you know, I spent a year kind of evaluating and looking all this stuff up, and now I'm running it, and it's making me, it's making me money every month, and it doesn't pay for a lot, but it's enough to pay for things every month, which is great if I ever actually withdrew it. But I'm more of an HODL guy.
Sure. So the last question I have then, if somebody then built their own home mining rig and decided they wanted to rent it out, is that possible?
Yeah, so that's, in fact, NiceHash has that capacity, and that's part of the whole that I was describing before about renting your equipment out to others. So you can do that through NiceHash, where it's similar to what I described with the MinerGate, same principle. Both of their software packages allow you to use your home PC to provide the mining power to that pool, or to be rented out. In the case of NiceHash Miner, you can rent it out literally to the pool and let other people do it. That's the one thing I've never actually tried doing, because once I realized that it was probably less efficient and less, I was making less money trying to do these things than to just run it myself and just let it continue to just mine directly. Because what I mine through my pool, I get my percentage of the cut from, whatever's been generated from the pool, and it's my cut. I just thought, why do I want middlemen involved in all these other bits and pieces? So I kind of bypassed the rent my equipment out to recover money from it, and I never did that part.
Okay.
But it is doable because there are other. I use NiceHash as an example, but there are other places where you can supply your own mining power to others to rent off of you rather than do it yourself, and other people rent it off of you. But I don't know what kind of profit or what kind of money you would make doing that. Probably, in the long term, you might be. They're paying you in Bitcoin, but I don't know how much Bitcoin they're paying you relative to what you might have mined if you had mined something, directly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Speaking of which, we talked about the fact that Bitcoin is not mineable with GPUs. So I'll just quickly mention that there's a difference that because Bitcoin runs on a different algorithm and uses an entirely different set of equipment, it's a completely different setup process. Bitcoin uses mines with something called an ASIC, ASIC, and you have to buy these ASICs in order to run them on the SHA 256 algorithm to mine Bitcoin. It's not something I've ever done because it's a much more expensive process and it's more complicated because it's just different. So it is another way of doing it. I know that people who are getting into that space and have lots of cheap electricity. In fact, a friend of mine just sent me a note and said that one of his friends just bought a whole bunch of ASICs and was making $40 per day running an ASIC on mining Bitcoin. But I can't validate that, but I know there's probably some truth in that because Bitcoin price has gone up. There's been a lot of good mining money to be made because there's been, they're trying to process as fast as they can and fees go up when the network gets clogged. So, if the guy owns a lot of ASIC cards, well done, good on him, but his house electric bill must be pretty high, but then again, he's easily paying it off. And his home heating probably is unnecessary in the cold winter months. But in the summer hot months, his house is probably an oven.
Oh, definitely.
So you do have to very much consider the cooling that's necessary in summer months or in hotter environments. And that's why there's a lot of people that try to, do things other ways to, ensure that the equipment is kept cool. Mm-hmm. Lots of fans running around the machine, keeping it in dark, cool places because it is a heat generator, big time.
Oh, great. So I know you have done a lot of work on this in the last year, and you have done a fantastic job of laying this down for us. I want to make sure before we go, is there anything else we've missed that you can think of about mining in general?
Why haven't you set yours up yet, Yuri?
I know. As we've been talking about this, I was thinking about that exact same thing. Also, it's freezing where I am in Boston. It is single digits, so setting up some place where I could generate some extra heat would be perfect because my basement is cold and dark and be great for that.
Okay, so here's the question that people should be now asking. If they haven't asked it, I will ask you. So let's pretend we're setting up a mine at your house. So okay. Yuri, how much electricity is it costing you per kilowatt hour for your electric bill?
Oh, now I have to go look that up. It is You've asked me a little bit of a stump speech because I haven't.
Well, it was a trick question because the answer is, and this is actually a great lesson for everybody. People are paying for their electric bills and oftentimes don't even know what they're paying. And actually the way the electric, and I learned all this from mining. I didn't even realize this. And I've just gone and renegotiated my electric bill, funny enough, and got it lower. So, just did a bit of a social hack and said, got to find a way to get my electric bill lower. But so here's the thing. The key that drives the costs of your whole home electric is all down to the price per kilowatt hour. Mm-hmm. And you could be spending in some parts of the U.S., I know people are paying 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And I know people in Europe are paying easily 5 times or 10 times that. They're paying 15 or 20 cents per kilowatt hour, sometimes even more. So that is really important to know because that's your cost.
Okay.
That's your single cost. There's a relationship between the kilowatt hours and the 130 watts that each card is generating is the game that you want to monitor. That's your cost side. So you go find that out, and then you can, from that number, figure out pretty much what your cost basis is because you can work out mathematically there's some calculators online for working out like how much your electricity bill will be or how much energy you're using. And as long as you know that you've got, let's say, 5 cards that are 120 watts, that's, let's say, 600 watts that are being generated, and you know what your cost for kilowatt hour is, you can put all that into a calculator, of which I've actually made one myself to work it out. And now I've got the costs all sorted. Then you need to know how many mega hashes or kilo hashes or giga hashes, what have you, you're generating per card, and what that translates to in terms of how much money you're making per card. And then you can compare the two. You've got costs on one side, you've got revenue on the other, and the difference between them is profit.
Perfect. So as you've been describing this, I pulled up my electric bill.
Okay. Sounds like I'm sending my mind to your house, I bet you.
You definitely are. So it breaks down into a couple of different things, but it looks like about 6 cents.
So you've got like a night charge and you've got like a day charge probably.
Yes, I do.
Right. So, and you may have something like saver bonuses. If you've reached a certain threshold, then they either increase it or decrease it depending on circumstances. Mm-hmm. And it might also depend on how many, I think it's how many, whether it's 1.5 or 3 or 6 you're paying them for in terms of the actual amount of power that goes through your house, which might also be dependent on your fuse box and what it can hold or handle. They may not say that on there, but those are the other factors, because of course, how much capacity in total can your house handle before you break the total electricity throughput on your fuse box, or that your electric company is currently supplying you as a maximum throttle. Mm-hmm. So I had to kind of suddenly, it's interesting. So we're getting into this really weird topic of like electric bills and stuff, and it bores me to no end to try to be an electrical engineer. No disrespect to the guys out there that are engineers. I have all the utmost respect for you guys, because this is just beyond me. But you know what? I needed to crack it. So I just sat there and I worked out the calculations. I spent a lot of time going through it. So I looked at power consumption. Of course, the hours running 24, price per kilowatt. And actually, it's really quite simple, because it's a simple calculation of the power consumption that you've got per card times the 24 hours times the price. And if you divide that by 1,000, that tells you your price per day of your electric bill for your mine.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I'll just repeat that. So the price per day of your mine is effectively the power consumption of a card, which we assume is around 120, 130, times 24 hours times the kilowatt hours. So for you, if you're talking about 6 cents and you were going to run 3 cards, so let's see, that would be, let's call it 12, 20, 36, 360, just to be on the safe side. So that would cost you about 52 cents a day, 363 a week, and it would cost you about $189 a year.
Wow, that's not too bad for 3 cards.
That's super cheap. That's very, very cheap. It's certainly not the same everywhere, but that's what it's costing. Okay. That's assuming one computer running with, as we said, 3 cards we said just now, right? So that's your cost side. And the flip side, which is trying to work out how much you're making per day, is a little bit of a guesswork, because with mining you don't get a consistent amount per day, because mining is not consistent. It all depends on the transactions going through the network, and it varies every single day. But you can make some estimations around that by looking at mining pools and looking at what people are getting to figure out how much you're going to get of that coin per day, and then you just multiply that per day amount times whatever the coin value is in Bitcoin or dollars or euros, and you immediately know what your profits are or what your revenues are, because you know what your costs are. You can then work out your profits from it as well.
Oh, perfect.
So that's a very simple way to break it down. As long as you know what your hashing power is, and therefore what you're making per day on that coin, and you can figure out, and you know what the coin is relative to Bitcoin or Ether or dollar or euro exchange rates, then you've got some estimation in terms of, how much revenue you've got from it. And then you compare that revenue against your cost, which we already just worked out, and voila, you know roughly what you're making per day as profit.
Great. So now I'm going to re-listen to this episode, the last 2 episodes, and try my hand at building one of these rigs.
Cool. So I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and give you a couple of episodes before I bring it back up, because I know it's not easy. I suspect you're probably going to go looking online a bunch of places. You're going to look at all the websites I've given you. You'll probably mention a few others that I didn't mention today, of which there's quite a few. There's just tons and tons of great websites out there with content. So I think that's great, Yuri. I'm super excited to hear this. It's just, for me, it's like hobby. I was sitting the other day and I looked on one of my wallets and suddenly there was an extra equivalent of about $400 that turned up on the account. And I said to my wife, "Where'd this $400 come from? Who sent this to me?" And I was like, just looking through everything, looking on my Etherscan, trying to figure out where did it come from. And I couldn't track it back to where the sender was. I just forgot. And then I went and looked at my mining and said, "Oh yeah, it was my Ether. I forgot." And it was just like, $400. And it's showing up all the time, but I just forgot.
Yeah.
It's just some Ether just turned up that just sits there and, that was it.
That's great. Excellent. Well, I look forward to having similar experiences myself very soon.
Well, I hope that others will find this as useful. It's been a deep dive and a lot of brain digging for me to really kind of try to break this down in the simplest way possible. I know it's a lot to take in. Certainly try to listen through. I tried to break this down as simple as I could and give everybody as much detail as I could without overwhelming. I think there's enough here that if anyone follows what we've talked about today, they should actually be able to set up their own mining rig and get it working. And I'd love to hear from people that do. I think it'd be just fantastic to hear some of the successes and epic fails that go along with it, because it's never as simple as it sounds. I mean, which is why I tried to describe it in as much detail as possible. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Well, this was great. So, thanks everyone for listening in today. Tune in next week on the Coin Chat where we talk about something.
Yes, and by something, we're going to talk about what's different from 2017 to 2018, some things to look forward to, and how cryptocurrency is redefining our world in 2018.
To the moon until next time.